Hi, I'm Femi Oke.
I'm Dan Ming, and you're in the stream. Today, what role does digital technology play in propagating or shutting down hate speech? In part two of our conversation about whether there should ever be limits to free speech, we moved the discussion from the streets to online.
This is an exclusive look at a clip from the upcoming season of the Al Jazeera documentary series, Fault Lines, which explores hate in the United States. Have a look at what Malkia Cyril, Executive Director at the Center for Media Justice, shares with our correspondent Josh Rushing about Facebook's anti-hate rules.
Right here. Anything that directly attacks people based on what are known as their protected characteristics.
That seems straightforward, is that?
Yeah.
Is there a problem with it?
Yeah, it's a problem with it because race means that white is as protected a class as black, which the problem is when you live in a society where everything protects white people and very few things protect black people, making those two things equally protected doesn't work. It actually overprotects white people and underprotects black people. When you rely on algorithms, you make an assumption that those algorithms can possibly be race neutral, and that is not possible. Algorithms are programmed by human beings, and human beings are not race neutral.
In the aftermath of the protests in Charlottesville, several tech companies went on an offensive against hate groups operating on their platforms. Airbnb matched user profiles to social media posts and cancelled reservations. The ride-sharing app Uber told its drivers it doesn't have to pick up racists, and several domain companies like GoDaddy and Google began cleaning their servers of groups affiliated to hate speech and far-right publications. Twitter and Facebook have banned a number of accounts. In a statement on Facebook, the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, wrote, "With the potential for more rallies, we're watching the situation closely and will take down threats of physical harm. We'll keep working to make Facebook a place where everyone can feel safe." A number of other companies have also taken similar measures. In the United States, companies are under no obligation to report hate speech, but does it set a dangerous precedent when companies with business interests start determining what's right or wrong, or in the current climate, removing hate speech from free speech conversation, like is done in several European countries, just the way it should be?
Here with us to discuss in Oakland, California, Jeremy Malcolm is Senior Global Policy Analyst for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. In Zurich, Switzerland, Hannes Grasegger is a reporter at Das Magazine.
In New Delhi, India, Chinmaya Arun is Assistant Professor at the National Law University and a Fellow at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. Melina Abdullah is an organizer for Black Lives Matter and Professor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And in Boston, Massachusetts, Harvey Silverglatt is a civil liberties lawyer in the United States. Welcome, guests. It's good to have you back here for part two, and welcome to our newcomers as well. Hannes. So, Airbnb looked at some social media profiles. They saw that they were neo-Nazis. They took them out of their system. Were you shocked when you heard that?
You know, I wasn't really shocked because I'm from a very different background, probably. So I'm from Europe. I'm born German. I live in Switzerland. So we have this culture of really looking at the stuff that has happened historically with the Nazis. And there are some limits to free speech we're giving in Germany, at least. And so if you do something like that, I can understand it, at least. It's not that I appreciate or I'm against it. Just I know where it can come from.
Chinmaya, in India, has anything similar happened in India where the tech companies themselves have said, OK, this is too far. We're policing this?
Yes, but mainly in the context of extremism and obscenity. So we've had a little bit of policing happening over this guy called Burhan Wani. He was killed in Kashmir, and he's one of those people that used armed violence to participate in the Kashmiri struggle. And Facebook basically took down a lot of content related to that, saying that it's extremist content, but actually a lot of it was political. There have been other kinds of speech that are kind of more analogous to sort of Nazis targeting vulnerable groups. And the problem with that has really been that the social media platforms don't recognize the words and don't know what to do with it.
So we asked our community online whether the government or private tech companies should take the main responsibility for combating hate speech, and we got this response from Wale. He tweeted, "Responsibility should be shared." He added this, and I'd like to pose this to you, Melina. He said, "Because I don't think any tech company wants to lose traffic, meaning profit." Melina, all of this begs the question, why is this all happening now with these US tech companies? Do you think they're trying to preempt a kind of boycott against them?
I don't know if they're trying to preempt a boycott. I think everyone, including tech companies, are starting to kind of contemplate what side of history they want to be on. So were they on the side of trying to kind of usher in rights and protections for those who are most under attack, or did they defend white supremacists? And I think that especially companies like Facebook, who have been under some heat when we think about the killing of Corinne Gaines and the taking down of her Facebook Live when she was assaulted by the police in Baltimore and ultimately killed by the police in Baltimore in front of her 5-year-old son. Many of us who were organizers got off Facebook as a protest. And so I think that companies, and especially tech companies, are starting to think about where they want to stand.
I think there is, though, an element of business interest from those companies as well. Namecheap is one of the companies. It's a domain registrar that refused to accept a domain name for the Daily Stormer, which is the Nazi magazine that was taken offline. And their CEO's explanation of this was partly he thought it was the right thing to do, but he was deeply unhappy about being the decision maker for the internet about whether the Daily Stormer should have a voice. And he said, well, really, I didn't have a choice because I have a company with 1,000 employees, and if I don't make this decision, basically he implied that he was fearing a boycott. So I think that is part of what is feeding into the decisions of these companies. They're making a difficult decision, an uncomfortable decision, and we think a dangerous decision. And part of the reason why they're doing that is because they're fearful of what will happen to their companies if they don't.
I think that's the interesting case with Facebook, probably. We were looking at Facebook as reporters and investigating Facebook, which is a company. The whole business model is basically speech and free speech, which has become their biggest problem. And so we actually discovered they had an army of now probably around 7,000 people who have to manage and limit free speech. As a US company that started wanting to extend the US concept of free speech, of being able to say mostly everything everywhere at any time, globally, they figured, oh, the world is really different. And there are like people like the Thai people who have this amazing respect for their king, and you cannot continue doing such things. And so they are starting to police it heavily. And it even makes them break the whole business model, which was building a global community. Now they're going into like building local communities. They're talking about like a fragmentation of Facebook right now, which means their core business asset, which was free speech, is making them fall apart probably in the near future.
Harvey, if you were advising some of these tech companies about their business ethics regarding free speech, what would you be telling them right now?
I would tell them that it is in their interest and their listeners' interest and their users' interest and their members' interest to allow robust free speech, because otherwise they deprive everybody of the knowledge of knowing what different people and groups think, and that makes us all less safe.
Jeremy, can you tell Harvey what the Daily Stormer, I always want to call it the Daily Stormtrooper for some bizarre reason, the Daily Stormer said about Heather High that made them literally be kicked off, and they've been carried on various different platforms for a long time. What did they say about Heather High, who was killed in Charlottesville by a car?
I would rather not repeat what they said, to be honest, because it was disgusting. It was basically disparaging her physical appearance, things like this, which were deeply, deeply disrespectful.
And the weekend that she died, this terrible article came out about her. And Harvey, so I'm just wondering, when that happens, it's the weekend that she died. Does this make any difference to your point of view?
Well, do you realize that we wouldn't know much about the Daily Stormer unless we let them speak and we could listen to them?
Yeah.
How do you find out who the despicable and dangerous people are if they are forced underground?
So you're saying that we should let everyone say everything so we can know who they are, but then for what purpose? So we know what they're doing. We know who they are. We know what they think for our own knowledge, because I think it's more our right. But then what does security look like is what I'm asking.
I think we have to understand that this is happening in a strongly commercialized context. So a lot of people and entities are using these new means of making propaganda and distributing their voices somewhere. They're using it as part of a kind of an information warfare strategy, where you can, as you said, you can boost your posts. This is not really free speech. This is you're using others' opinions to kind of push certain sentiments in a certain area, which is all feasible via Facebook. So this is actually part of a much bigger conflict, which has a commercialized environment of speech, I think, which is a big problem. So it's not about somebody voicing his opinion.
So I'd like to
completely. And I think that there's another angle to this also, which is, I really like that you use the Lise Majesté example of the laws that Facebook is observing around the world. I think that the other, there's one problem, which is that powerful groups have access to resources, and they're able to flood the online platforms with speech. But there's more to it, right? Because powerful groups also have access to public institutions, and they create norms sometimes that platforms have incentives to listen to. So for example, in India, and actually in many other parts of the world, the platforms have been pushed back a little bit through internet shutdowns, which is basically what governments do when they feel that there's some sort of harmful speech circulating online. And so what's happened now is that platforms appear to be negotiating quite a lot more with local governments. And what they're coming out with is not necessarily a golden free speech standard. It's the standard that the local governments want. That's worth considering. The other thing, Harvey, that I would put to you is that I wonder whether free speech necessarily means that everyone should be allowed to speak whenever they want, wherever they want, including situations in which it can be completely inappropriate to bring certain kinds of highly offensive speech up. So the choice that we have is not necessarily censor it completely or permit it to happen wherever, whenever. Maybe there's a way to regulate it in a way in which the speech is out there, but isn't necessarily being used to threaten people or to disrespect them in unacceptable ways.
So on this point, I'd like to broaden this out and just make this a little more international. So Hannes, I want to play you this video comment we got from Julia. She's a Canadian student. She's in Germany right now. She attended a counter demonstration against a neo-Nazi rally in Berlin, and this is what she had to say.
If Nazi imagery is banned and Nazi gestures are banned and all speech venerating Germany's Nazi past are banned, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that this march was allowed to exist in the first place. And therefore it only was reasonable that counter-demonstrators would want to block this march from taking place, even if just to reaffirm the anti-Nazi consensus in this society.
So, Hannes, can you explain to us how does the German government deal with certain expressions of what we would consider hate speech, perhaps, like carrying Nazi signs, and then why are people allowed to march, neo-Nazis allowed to march, but not maybe hold certain symbols?
So, if you remember, the birth of propaganda comes through marketing. So there's a certain historical knowledge in Germany about how marketing tools can be used to distribute certain messages across rational boundaries. So if you think about this logo, the swastika, for example, we have that law saying it's not legal to use that logo because it comes with such a heavy weight historically, and this is one example. Another example might be that you're not allowed to say all these old Hitlerish hail things that the guys in Charlottesville during the clashes over there were using to provoke people, because it's basically not about messages, and it's not about free speech in the sense of information, but it's basically about free information. And this is, free emotion. So it's an emotional attack. And I think this is also what we have to discuss. We talk about speech, but really some things are really not speech. Some things are meant to cause something emotionally. And Facebook and all these internet networks are great transmitters of emotion. And this is why we're seeing these clashes happening. So people are emotionalizing, distributing, then they're like having attacks on the street, then they're sending out the imagery of this and getting more emotional feedback and support. So it's kind of an intertwined reality and a weaponization, actually, of free speech that we're experiencing thanks to social media, I think. And this is what we have to look at. And this is like strongly connected to the German history. We know about marketing, propaganda, information warfare, active measures, all that stuff has been there. So we just block out certain things as if you would block out something on Facebook. It's really old and really simple too.
Jeremy, there are a couple of examples that you shared with us. You said, look, this is what happens when you start blocking free speech online. There are consequences. I'm looking here at this headline. Antifa's most prominent Jew booted from Twitter. What happened?
Oh, well, that's just one of many cases where they haven't reached as much prominence as the case of the Daily Stormer that we've been talking about. But there are many other cases where people on both sides of politics, including, so to take the Jewish and Palestinian conflict, on both sides of that, who have been blocked from social media, who have had posts deleted or have been removed from Facebook, for example. So we have a catalogue of these. In fact, we have a whole website full of these.
Here's another case.
The risk is, if I may interrupt, in that case,
sure.
There was this amazing Haaretz investigation of the blocking of Palestinians and Israelis on Facebook. And what turns out, Facebook from the start was kind of fairly neutral, but then the Israeli government had such a direct line to Facebook, actually, that it was able to exert more influence. This is not because of a bias, like a bias thing, and that's what I mean. And this is also what we see during the conflict in Crimea. This is happening everywhere.
Here's another example that you shared.
These platforms.
Here's another example, Jeremy. Let me just share this. It's kind of easier to actually understand this within the context of your examples. I want to share them with our audience. Film of US Army destroying Nuremberg swastika violates YouTube's policy on hate speech. So this is that idea of like a blanket. This is where we draw the line. This is what's okay. This is where we draw the line. And there's a problem with drawing a line because this is what happens.
Yeah, and the video clip that you played at the beginning of this segment saying that algorithms are not suitable for making decisions about speech is absolutely right. I mean, we couldn't agree more with that. But even when you have humans making decisions, the platforms are not the right people to be making this decision because they are not human rights experts. They are not arbiters of speech that anyone has elected. I mean, platforms have the right to control what they put online, but they're not very good at doing it. They often make mistakes, and so we have to be really careful and cautious about allowing them to do too much.
This is a really old West Coast U.S. idea of like this is like 1990s Wired readers saying, "Oh, we have a free internet." No, it's not true. You know, I come from media, from old media. I write long reports in print. We have a company that actually decides what it wants to publish, what it doesn't want to publish. And so it's just about evading the costs of managing and editing the content that is being set free and used for commercial purposes, as in the case of any newspaper, television, whatever. Here, agreeing to Al Jazeera, this interview, I also agreed to not using certain words, actually, like the words you didn't want to mention about the Daily Stormer using for Heather Heyer. So these are just bad words, and that's a slight form of censorship, at least in theory. So I can agree to this. I mean, we must get away from this like ultra theoretical limitation, unlimited free speech thing, and also we must get away from putting no responsibility on Facebook. Actually, they're already doing it. They're doing it in the shades. They're doing it invisibly, and they're not letting us discuss it by not publishing the limits they're setting to free speech.
Chimay, I agree with you. Sorry.
Yeah, Chimay, go ahead.
I agree with you to an extent, which is that yes, they are already doing it, but I would stop at making the comparison between an online platform and an actual publication, because I work on both free speech and online intermediaries, and my most recent work has been on hate speech, and I think it's important to engage with the specific tensions that raises. Right, you don't want to put the same editorial obligations on Facebook, because that would mean that user-generated content will reduce, and it's not necessarily something that we want. But I feel like you have a point that much more can be done with algorithms which are already making decisions about speech, and it would be helpful if the online platforms are more transparent, if they engage more with free speech experts, while bearing in mind, Jeremy, that they're not necessarily the most appropriate people to make the free speech decisions. The truth is that they are making them, and so then they might as well make them in consultation with people that know about it.
Well, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to take content off their platforms, particularly the ones who are hosting directly, like Facebook and Twitter. Different story for people like domain name registrars, but for those who are hosting content, they can remove, they do remove. We just think that they need to be transparent about it. They need to have a process of appeal so that if you've had something taken down wrongly, you can have that reviewed, so that there's a bit of due process, a bit of accountability there.
So we're getting people online who are telling us, just from a user behavior perspective, just don't give a reaction to hate speech. Melina, I want you to look at this tweet. Sarah said to us, don't pay attention to it. The majority of people write hateful slurs to provoke a reaction, and the less people react, the less inclined people will be to write such things. Melina, what do you think about that? Is that enough?
Well, I think that we need to recognize that sometimes I think Sarah may be thinking about 1 or 2 tweets or 1 or 2 Facebook posts. We need to understand how well resourced some of these people are in engaging in really what is online harassment that pervades our spaces. So for instance, there's something that I'm just learning about called doxing, right? Where they will share your information and then they will literally hit you up like when I was doxed every 10 seconds, right? And you can't just ignore it because I couldn't figure out how to turn off the notifications on my phone. I couldn't figure out how to block it. They'll even, kind of start calling you at work. So these are the kinds of things that happen, and it's not so easy to ignore. I have learned when it's 1 or 2 people on Twitter who have like an egg as their logo.
No more eggs. They're like little silhouettes now. And for people who've never been doxed, do you want to explain what doxing is?
Sure. So I'm just learning about it. I didn't know what it was. But at some point, you may say or do something, or you may become a target, usually of right-wingers. I've never heard of anybody on the left doing this, but right-wing organizations will target someone who they think needs to kind of be taken out. And what they'll do is share all of their information, and they have these massive kind of communication strategies where they use pretty much every social media platform available, but then they also get it out to kind of hundreds of thousands of followers or people who engage in a certain way, and then they start tweeting at you, they start inboxing you, they send all of your information, sometimes even your home address, and it really becomes more than about the speech. It's also about kind of threatening actions, if not violent actions.
It's been really interesting listening to our 2 conversations that we had, the one on the previous stream and the one on today's stream, is that how many different perspectives you bring to this conversation. And I suspect the people who came to that conversation with one opinion haven't changed that opinion, but it's been really great for you to share them with us. Dan, where do you want to leave us?
I'll give the last word to Melanie in South Africa. She tweeted us and said, speech makes action both possible and probable. Quite literally, speech matters.
All right, thank you to our guests, all 5 of you, Jeremy and Hannes and Chimay, Melina and Harvey. Thanks for being on the stream today. Appreciate your time. Take care.